over 200 years, a dark shadow has lingered over black people across the world, a weight that did not begin with them but was placed upon them by systems that feared their light. This curse was never spiritual. It was constructed. It was not cast by some divine force, but by the cruel hands of colonizers, slave traders, and those who benefited from turning kings and queens into commodities. To understand this curse, you must look at the lies told, the truths hidden, and the identities stolen. The chains that bound the black body were only a small part of the greater plan. The real chains were placed on the mind, on the spirit, and on the very image of what it meant to be black. For centuries, our ancestors were told they were less, told their skin was a mark of shame, that their cultures were primitive, and their languages were savage. But if you dig deep enough beyond the textbooks written by the victors, you will find a truth that flips the entire narrative upside down. Black people are not cursed. They were targeted because they were powerful. What was taken from them, land, gold, identity, heritage, pride, was not just stolen for profit. It was stolen to rewrite the future, to erase them from the story of greatness and replace them with pain, struggle, and stereotypes. And for over 200 years, that false story has been passed down like scripture. But every lie has a limit, and every storm has a breaking point. The curse that many feel today is not a supernatural one. It's the residue of centuries of psychological warfare, economic sabotage, and cultural erasure. But what they couldn't kill was the fire that still lives in every black child, born into a world that undervalues their worth but cannot ignore their power. Every time a black man or woman rises from the ashes of poverty, oppression, and generational trauma, the curse cracks. Every time truth is spoken, not just to power but to the people, the curse weakens. And every time someone refuses to accept the version of history handed to them, they punch a hole in the system that built the curse in the first place. This curse, in truth, has always been a lie, a carefully crafted illusion to make black people forget who they are, and worse, to make the world forget who they were. But the soul remembers. Even when your name has been stripped, your gods have been renamed, and your traditions demonized, the soul remembers. That's why they worked so hard to silence your ancestors, to burn your libraries, to crush your uprisings, and to rewrite your stories. They knew that if you ever remembered, if you ever reclaimed your identity, you would rise in a way the world has never seen before. For over 2 centuries, the struggle has not just been physical, but mental. Systems were designed to make the black man feel inferior, to make the black woman question her beauty, to make black children grow up believing success was for someone else. But what's incredible is this: in spite of all of it, the black community still rose, still created, still led revolutions, still invented, still inspired. The resilience of black people is not ordinary, it is extraordinary. You've survived what should have destroyed you. You've thrived in places that were never meant for you to succeed. And that should tell you one thing: the so-called curse was never real. What's real is the brilliance in your DNA, the strength in your lineage, the fire in your spirit. And that is something no one can take. Today, we stand at a crossroads in history. The world is changing. Information is spreading. Truth is becoming harder to hide. And black voices are rising, not just to speak, but to lead. This is the moment where you must decide whether to carry the weight of that 200-year lie into the next century, or whether you will drop it, break it, and walk forward in truth. You are not cursed. You are chosen. You are not lost. You've been lied to. And now that you know it, the responsibility is yours. The responsibility to heal, to build, to reclaim, to break the cycles that were never yours to begin with. There is no shame in the struggle when the system was never designed for you to win. But there is power in rising anyway. And make no mistake, The world is watching. Some will want you to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay confused, because your clarity threatens their control. Your pride threatens their lies. Your success threatens the story they've spent centuries writing. But none of that matters now. What matters is what you do with what you now know. Will you choose to stay beneath the weight of a curse that was never yours? Or will you rise like the generations before you prayed you would? They endured, they fought, they survived, not just for themselves, but for you. Every scar they carried was an investment in your freedom. Every tear they cried watered the soil for your growth. So don't let their pain be wasted. Don't let their silence be your silence. You are the answer to their suffering. You are the proof that the curse did not win. And you are the beginning of a new story, one that finally honors the truth, the beauty, and the brilliance of black people. This speech is not to shame anyone. It's to wake everyone. Because healing begins with truth. The systems that created the so-called curse are still operating in schools, in media, in laws, in economics. But awareness is the beginning of freedom. Once you see it, you can name it. Once you name it, you can fight it. And once you fight it, you can defeat it. The past may have shaped our pain, but it does not define our future. You carry within you the wisdom of ancestors, the strength of warriors, and the dreams of kings and queens. It's time to remember, time to rise, time to end the lie once and for all. Because the truth is, you were never cursed, you were feared. And now the world must face what happens when the people they tried to bury rise up with clarity, pride, and purpose. The idea that black people have been living under a 200-year curse is not only misleading, it is dangerously false. This belief has been subtly pushed through generations to mask the reality of what truly happened. The truth is, there was no divine force that looked upon Africa and its people and decided to punish them. There was no spiritual hand that cast a dark shadow over black skin or over black progress. What actually happened was deliberate, calculated, and brutally human. It was not a curse from the heavens, but a campaign from empires built on greed. Colonization, slavery, and economic exploitation were not the result of some cosmic punishment. They were orchestrated strategies that ripped nations apart and dehumanized millions, all for profit. It was humans, not God, who designed a system that classified black people as inferior, as property, as less than. It was men in power who created the narrative that Africa was backward, that Africans were uncivilized, and that their culture, beliefs, and values were unworthy. These ideas didn't come from the sky. They came from the minds of those who wanted to dominate and control. When slave ships crossed the Atlantic, they didn't carry cursed people. They carried stolen royalty, stolen labor, stolen futures. These weren't criminals or outcasts chained below deck. They were farmers, leaders, healers, artists, and scholars. The so-called curse was a story crafted to justify the horror, to silence the screams of the oppressed, and to ease the conscience of the oppressors. It was easier to believe that a people were cursed than to admit they were victims of one of the greatest crimes in human history. It was easier to build institutions and religions that taught submission and silence than to empower people to question, resist, and reclaim what was taken. The lie was massive, but it was maintained for centuries because it served the interests of those in power. And generation after generation, that lie turned into shame. That lie turned into silence. And for many, it turned into self-hate. But now we know better. And when you know the truth, you are no longer bound by the lie. You are no longer enslaved by the idea that your suffering was destined, because it wasn't. The systems that were built to destroy identity are still working. They still show up in textbooks that erase African contributions to science, to medicine, to philosophy. They still appear in media portrayals that only show poverty, corruption, and chaos. They still exist in economic structures that strip wealth from African nations and deny credit to black entrepreneurs. But the truth cannot stay buried forever. Every time a new generation asks why, a layer of the lie is peeled back. Every time someone questions the history they were taught, the foundation of the curse begins to shake. And every time a black person stands tall in their identity, celebrates their heritage, and chooses to love themselves loudly, the lie loses power. We must understand that this narrative of a curse was designed not only to oppress but to disconnect. Because a people who do not know where they come from are easier to manipulate. A people disconnected from their past are more likely to accept a future written by others. That's why the truth must be reclaimed. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. This isn't about anger, it's about awakening. The moment you realize the curse was never real is the moment you start living from a place of truth instead of trauma. You begin to see that your worth was never tied to what was done to your ancestors. Your value was never diminished by chains, by colonization, or by propaganda. In fact, your value is proven by the very fact that so much effort was spent to erase it. If black people weren't powerful, there wouldn't have been a need to strip them of their names, their languages, their lands, and their faith. The campaign to dehumanize was so intense because the potential was so great. The 200-year curse is nothing more than a cover-up. It's a cover-up for stolen resources, stolen labor, stolen culture, and stolen futures. But we are now in a time where information is accessible, and with it comes responsibility. The responsibility to speak, to teach, to heal, and to rebuild. This generation has a choice. We can either inherit the shame and silence that was passed down, or we can break it. We can choose to see ourselves not through the eyes of those who oppressed us, but through the truth of who we've always been. The lie was that we were cursed. The truth is we were feared. And the more we awaken to this truth, the more we become unstoppable. So to every black person hearing this, know this deeply. The curse was never yours to carry. It was created to confuse you, to delay you, and to divide you from your greatness. But that season is ending. That illusion is breaking, and your rise has already begun. Black people were never cursed. What they experienced was not the wrath of heaven, but the fear of those who saw their brilliance and were threatened by it. The kingdoms of Africa were vast, sophisticated, and wealthy. Their knowledge of science, architecture, mathematics, medicine, and governance existed long before Europe had even established itself in the modern world. Empires like Mali, Ghana, and Songhai held treasures of gold, education, and art. Timbuktu had libraries and centers of learning, while much of Europe was still crawling through the Dark Ages. The people of Africa were not behind, they were ahead. And that is what made them a target. When European powers arrived on African shores, they were not looking at a continent of savages. They saw organized systems, advanced cities, and cultures rooted in spirituality, agriculture, and cooperation. But they also saw opportunity not to collaborate, but to conquer. What they couldn't compete with through fairness, they decided to take by force, and to justify that force, they created lies. They said Africans were less human. They said black skin was a mark of divine punishment. They said this was a people needing to be saved. But the truth was, they were trying to break a people they could not intellectually match. They rewrote history to hide what they were really doing, stealing genius, labor, and land. Slavery wasn't built on a curse, it was built on fear of what black excellence could become. So they attacked the roots. They destroyed names, languages, and traditions. They erased family trees, religions, and stories. They created systems meant to disfigure self-worth and identity. And through this long, brutal process, they tried to make people forget who they truly were. But even in the face of change, rebellions happened. Even after being beaten and stripped of everything, strength survived. They couldn't kill the spirit because that spirit was born of truth. And no amount of rewriting can erase that. This narrative that black people were cursed was a clever way to remove guilt from the oppressors and place shame on the oppressed. It convinced many to question their own worth, to think their suffering was deserved. But suffering isn't proof of a curse, it's proof of resistance. It's proof of a system designed to crush but failing to fully do so. Black people have endured the most and still found a way to shine, to lead, to love, to create. What kind of cursed people rise again and again? What kind of cursed people birth culture, influence music, innovate technology, and dominate sports, politics, and education when given even a sliver of opportunity? There was never a curse, only a campaign to silence the roar of a mighty people, and it is ending. Because the world is waking up. History is being uncovered. The lies are breaking apart. People are beginning to understand that Africa was the cradle of civilization, not the footnote. That the people stolen and sold were not broken, they were the builders of nations. They didn't lack intelligence, they were targeted because of it. Their greatness wasn't hidden, it was hidden from them. So when someone says there was a curse, remind them that it was not on the people, it was on the system. A system so insecure that it needed to destroy in order to feel powerful. A system so hollow that it had to rob others to build itself. A system that trembled at the thought of free, educated, united black people. That system is what's cursed, not the people who survived it. And now, the narrative must be reclaimed. The pride must be restored. The truth must be louder than the lie. To be black is not to be born under a shadow. It is to be born from royalty, strength, and legacy. The generations before you were not cursed, they were chosen. They carried fire in their bones and wisdom in their blood, and you are their continuation. You are the proof that what was tried has failed. You are the reminder that brilliance cannot be buried forever. You carry the DNA of kings, queens, warriors, and scholars. Don't ever forget it, because the world didn't fear you for no reason. They feared you because of your power, your spirit, and your light. Generational trauma did not begin with weakness, nor does it continue because of it. It was born from a long, painful history that deliberately stripped people of their names, their culture, their land, and their identity. The legacy of black people has been misunderstood, misrepresented, and often hidden behind walls of lies told by those who benefited from their oppression. These lies were never about truth. They were about control. Over centuries, people were conditioned to believe that their pain was a result of some divine curse, that their struggle was a reflection of their worth. But the truth is that this trauma was not a mark of failure. It was a reflection of the enormous weight placed on shoulders that were never meant to carry such suffering. And despite that weight, those shoulders did not collapse. They endured. The lie was repeated for so long that it became a whisper in the back of every generation's mind. A quiet voice that asked, why are we always behind? Why does it feel like we are always starting over? Why do we carry pain we don't understand? That voice wasn't self-hate, it was confusion. Because when you've had your roots removed and your history rewritten, you question everything. You grow up with pride in your skin, but confusion in your spirit. You know there's more to who you are, but no one taught you where to find it. That's how trauma becomes generational. Not because one group was weak, but because systems were designed to keep people lost, to keep them searching for answers in places where only silence lived. That silence made it easier to believe something was wrong with us instead of recognizing that something was taken from us. But now we are standing in a time where the truth is rising again. The curtain is being pulled back. Books are being opened. Stories are being reclaimed. And with that, healing begins. Not just for one person, but for entire generations. Because when even one person sees the truth clearly, they can speak it into the lives of others. And every time the truth is spoken, the weight gets lighter. The lie gets weaker. The identity becomes stronger. Reclaiming pride doesn't come from a place of arrogance. It comes from survival. From knowing that your ancestors did not endure all that pain just for you to live in shame. They endured it so you could one day stand tall and speak what they couldn't. Their silence was forced, but your voice is free. That freedom carries responsibility. It means learning history that was buried. It means loving features that the world once called ugly. It means protecting culture that was mocked. It means building where everything was once broken. The process isn't easy. Healing never is. But it is powerful. Because when a people begin to see themselves clearly, they become unstoppable. When they no longer accept the lie of inferiority, the cycle begins to break. It doesn't break all at once. It breaks with every act of self-love, with every child taught the truth, with every lie rejected, with every gift, talent, and story reclaimed. This healing does not mean forgetting the pain. It means using it as fuel. It means transforming that suffering into purpose. It means turning trauma into testimony, wounds into wisdom, and oppression into opportunity. When you see your past clearly, You understand your power. You stop measuring yourself by what others said you couldn't do. You begin to see what you were always meant to do. You realize that your greatness didn't begin when others approved of you. It began when you were born. The systems of this world may have tried to erase you, but they could not define you. Your worth was never tied to your pain. It was always tied to your truth. This is how the curse is broken, not by waiting for someone else to validate your journey, not by trying to fit into a version of history that was never written for you, but by standing in your truth, walking in your pride, and choosing to be the one who ends the silence. You were never weak. You were never cursed. You are the evidence of survival, the seed of something greater, and the beginning of a new chapter where your story is finally told the way it always should have been. Despite everything that has been done to break them, black communities continue to rise with a spirit that cannot be contained. Through centuries of forced labor, exploitation, segregation, and calculated erasure, something within remained unbroken. It was more than survival. It was a quiet, unshakable determination to live, to thrive, to reclaim what was taken. Systems of oppression were designed to suppress brilliance, to dim a light that was never meant to go out. And yet in every corner of the world where black people exist, there is still music, still invention, still movement, still the sound of laughter and resistance. This is not the behavior of a cursed people. This is the response of those whose strength runs deeper than history books are willing to admit. Even in places where opportunities were withheld and futures were intentionally limited, creativity found a way. From the cotton fields to the jazz clubs, from slave quarters to Ivy League classrooms, black excellence bloomed in soil not meant to grow anything. And that in itself is a miracle, not a miracle of luck, but of will. There were laws written to keep black people in chains, institutions built to limit their voices, systems created to ensure their silence. But the voice still found its way into literature, into protests, into classrooms, into governments. The stories still got told, the hands still created, the minds still innovated, the bodies still marched. That is not a curse. That is resistance made visible. Every child raised in a world that doesn't reflect their greatness is a testament to the ongoing effects of a deliberate system. But every one of those children who stands tall, speaks proudly, and loves themselves fiercely is also proof that the system failed to win. The curse, if there ever was one, has been flipped. The real burden now belongs to those who lied, who stole, who rewrote the truth to favor their comfort. For too long, the world watched black people suffer and called it fate. But what they witnessed was survival. What they witnessed was legacy, passing through pain and turning it into power. Look at the arts, at culture, at politics, at science, at education. Black voices are no longer in the margins. They are rising to the center, not because the system allowed it, but because the spirit demanded it. Inventions that changed the world were born from hands that were once forced to build for free. Music that reshaped global culture came from a people told they had no voice. Philosophies that transformed nations were shaped by those who were once banned from reading. This is not the outcome of a cursed history. This is the manifestation of a divine inner strength that outlasts oppression, that refuses to accept limits placed by fear. There is a false narrative that suffering made black people stronger. But the truth is that strength was always there. It wasn't created by oppression. It was revealed in spite of it. That strength existed before chains, before colonization, before exploitation. It came from ancient civilizations that taught the world about science, mathematics, medicine, and architecture. That strength carried across oceans, endured generations of abuse, and now moves boldly into a future that belongs just as much to black children as it does to anyone else. The world may have tried to erase the past, but they couldn't erase what lives in the soul. You see that spirit in entrepreneurs who rise with nothing but a dream. You see it in mothers who raise leaders without resources. You see it in students who walk into classrooms that were never built for them and still come out on top. You see it in the way black communities create culture, define language, reshape industries, and reclaim identities. That energy, that excellence, that unstoppable momentum, it's not new, it's ancient, it's inherited, it's sacred, and no curse ever had the power to destroy it. So when people speak of generational pain, let them also speak of generational brilliance. Let them speak of survival that became success. Let them speak of barriers that were broken, not by permission, but by persistence. The curse never belonged to the people. It belonged to the narrative. And now that narrative is collapsing. What is left in its place is truth. And truth cannot be undone. Black people are not rising because someone gave them a chance. They are rising because it's who they are, because resilience is in their blood, because greatness cannot be stolen forever. This is not a time to carry shame, but a moment to ignite awareness, to awaken a sleeping giant within a people who have endured the impossible and still kept their dignity intact. Black people are not victims of random misfortune. They are the evidence of survival in its most powerful form. Their history was never rooted in helplessness, but in resilience, resistance, and unshakable pride, even when the world refused to see it. The narrative often portrayed them as broken, yet the truth is they were never shattered. They were stripped, silenced, and scattered. But even then they held on. Through forced migrations, stolen names, and generations of systemic sabotage, they held on. And today that same strength is no longer hidden. It is rising unapologetically, refusing to accept the labels given by those who tried to write them out of history. When you examine the depth of what was endured, from being torn from their homeland, to being sold like property, to having language, culture, and identity violently removed, you don't see weakness. You see the endurance of a spirit that could not be broken. Even after hundreds of years of degradation and institutional exclusion, that spirit remained unkillable. It was passed from generation to generation, not as bitterness, but as a silent knowing that something greater lived within. That greatness did not need permission to exist. It did not wait to be acknowledged. It continued, even when it was buried beneath chains and cruelty. Because that's what truth does. It finds a way to rise. What was labeled as a curse was never divine punishment. It was the manipulation of power, the rewriting of history, the calculated effort to control and dominate. But domination cannot erase the truth. Truth will always rise, sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully, but always eventually it emerges. And with it comes a reckoning with how much was taken, a reckoning with how much was hidden, a reckoning with how much was stolen, and how deeply it affected generations who were told they came from nothing. But how could they have come from nothing when they came from the birthplace of civilization, from empires that ruled with knowledge, not weapons, from communities that valued harmony over greed? The chains may have changed form, from iron to policy, from plantation to prison, from segregation to discrimination, but the mission remained, to suppress that original greatness. But despite it all, that greatness continues to push forward. It moves in the rhythm of spoken word. It dances in the freedom of movement. It thrives in innovation, and it grows in the roots of identity that are being replanted every single day. That is not survival. That is rebirth. It is not weakness masked as progress. It is power reclaiming its name. Every step forward in the face of generational trauma is not just a win for one person. It's a shift in history. It is the breaking of a pattern that was never deserved in the first place. It is a loud declaration that what was once taken will no longer be surrendered. This awakening is not about revenge. It is about restoration. Restoring pride in the features that were mocked. Restoring respect in the heritage that was denied. Restoring the brilliance of ancestors who were more than just labor. They were leaders, thinkers, creators, and healers. No longer can the world pretend that black excellence is the exception. It is the rule. It always was. But now it is undeniable. In every field, in every nation, in every corner of society, that excellence speaks loudly, whether through art, activism, business, scholarship, or resilience itself. And that voice does not ask for validation. It simply is. And because it simply is, it cannot be ignored, silenced, or erased anymore. The false story that this people were cursed was a tool used to strip them of their power. But what power was truly lost when generation after generation they continued to survive, to teach, to grow, and to lead. There is a divine fire burning within this journey, a fire that was never extinguished, only buried beneath centuries of oppression. And now that fire is lighting a new path forward, a path where no one has to doubt their worth, their beauty, or their place in this world. The journey has been long, the pain has been deep, but the rise is unstoppable. Because this strength was never about overcoming a curse. It was about waking up to the truth that the curse was never real. What was real was the system that told that lie. What is real now is the power that no longer believes it.